Hey everyone, thank you for tuning in. The Virtuality Podcast team had a chance to attend the 2018 Pax East Conference in Boston, Massachusetts, April 5th to the 8th. We feel PAX events are special because unlike enterprise events, for example VR and AR conferences, it's an event for all gamers excited to try new things. So it's encouraging to see so many VR games being showcased. It's further evidence that VR is rapidly being adopted in the gaming community. Craig Herndon had a chance to talk with several of the VR companies attending. We hope you enjoy the conversations, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more VR and AR news. You can find us at virtuality.show and wherever podcasts are found, including Spotify.
All right, so we're here at PAX East 2018 with Matteo from Tiny Bull Studios. So I just tried their demo of Blind. So I think most of the viewers, they're going to think about notes on blindness. So did you try that, and how did that influence your experience?
We did try that, yes, even though the experience is fairly different, of course.
Yes.
But yes, blindness in VR is a concept that is really interesting to us, even if, of course, notes on blindness was a bit later, came out a bit later than the concept of our game, who was born in 2014. But yeah, the idea, the premise is similar, and it's very interesting. Like the way we play with audio kind of reminds us of that. So yeah.
Yeah. So when you started out, you had like a diorama-esque artwork. So what made you go with that as the opening kind of scene?
Well, we like the idea of showing. We like symbolism. And the diorama symbolizes something that, of course, I cannot disclose right now because it kind of spoils the story. But yeah, the diorama itself is a representation of something that is very relevant in the game, and the way it builds piece by piece as you progress through the game shows, in a way, how the story is progressing.
Right, and what's interesting is you didn't specifically choose to just make the user blind or simulate blindness. But you did make it to where visuals were, you couldn't just rely on just the visuals to go through and complete the experience. You had to think, and sometimes I would even close my eyes to try and focus on like the music puzzle or listen to the voice that's talking, just to try and focus, because that's like clear what needs to be done in order to get through the puzzles. Can you speak a little bit to the design process on when you created these puzzles?
Right, so, well, of course, yes, it's not a blind person simulator, definitely not. It doesn't want to be. But yes, like you said, we want to have players think with their ears, which is something that we never do in games. Like, we try to think of puzzles that made sense to listen. Like, for example, one of the early puzzles you encounter, and which you tried in the demo, is a very simple sequence, pressing buttons in a certain sequence, which is something that you normally do with colors or symbols, but in this case you have to recreate a tune. You listen to some music, and then you have to press buttons that each button plays a portion of that same music, and you have to find the right order. And it is incredibly difficult for most people because we're not used to do that, to think about what we're listening to rather than what we're seeing. And that's something that we really wanted to do in the game.
Yeah, it forces you to slow down and actually just stop and think. And that's like where I kind of had to just like take a breath, listen, and actually just listen to it and be like, okay, now this is what I'm doing, and you press, and then you're listening to little sound bites to try and figure out what order they need to go in to recreate the music.
Yeah, exactly.
It really just forces you to just slow down, because we live very fast-paced lives and try and get through, and it's a very different way of thinking. And I think by calling it blind, you're going in, getting the user to prepare them for what the experience is going to be like, without necessarily simulating blindness. So you had mentioned that you did consult with some blind people while making the game?
Yeah, absolutely. The father of one of the writers of the story is actually blind, and one of our close friends is sight impaired, has been sight impaired for a few years now because of an illness. And we also spoke to some other sight impaired people to try and get a sense of how blind people perceive the world and what they actually use to navigate it. Like, for example, the cane, we use it mostly like a sonar of sorts.
Right.
But blind people don't usually do that much.
Right.
But it's rather an extension of their hands to sort of touch the ground and their surroundings. So we try to do that by adding some sort of lighting to what you touch.
Right.
Like if you move your hands on a surface or an object, it actually becomes lit.
Right,
because
it becomes more
that's
clear.
a way of representing how you are touching it and you're feeling the shape of the object and something like that. So yes, we did take inspiration from how blind people see, in a way, the world,
right.
but not that much. Like, it's not a
right.
blind person simulator. We a very interesting thing that we tried to take inspiration from is blind people who use clicking. Clicking is a technique of making some noise with your tongue, and it's very similar to how bats use their hearing, like a
right.
sonar.
Yep.
And in a way, these blind people can perceive the world even better than how regular people can. So it's sort of like a superpower. For example, there was a documentary showing a blind guy navigating a cave, and he can only do that with his tongue, clicking with his tongue, and he could see better than the regular people that he was with. So that's something that we try to do in our game as well. For example, in a puzzle, there's a box with a metal ball in it, which you have to guide through a maze. And the box is, of course, closed and it's not transparent, so you wouldn't be able to see the ball. But since it's making noise on the other side of the cover, you can actually see the inside of the box and the maze, and it helps you navigate through it to the end. So that's sort of trying to make blindness into a superpower of sorts.
Right. And like with the cane, it also gets the user into like the embodiment of it. So there's some research that if you make someone dress in a certain way, they'll tend to try and think in the role of what you put them in. So like if you dress someone up as a police officer, they might act more like a police officer. So if you're giving someone a cane, right, they're going to try and think more like a blind person, right? Because that's the role you're putting them in. And I think it's very unique how you've, I would say, successfully created an environment that at least requires you to think in that certain way, even if it's not replicating the exact experience. So one thing is that I find interesting is your the guide in the game. And then at the very end of at least the demo, when you finally see him, you don't actually see the face. And so I'm curious if when you were consulting with blind people, so I would assume if you had vision before, when you do talk to people, you would try and visualize a face. And if you're blind, you can't actually do that. So it was interesting that you decided to at least do a wireframe for the face. So you want to go ahead and talk about that?
Yeah. Well, the shape of the head of the let's call him the villain or the antagonist of the game, the apparent antagonist at least. The shape is shaped more or less like those insulating foam that you find in recording studios. I don't know if you get what I mean. And that's sort of a representation of what you said, exactly, because for a blind person who has never seen in their life, if they're born blind, imagining a face is a bit difficult. So blind people sometimes touch your face to kind of get the shape of it. But until they do, they have a general idea of where your head is and the general shape of it. But since this antagonist, let's call him the Warden, since you don't really want to go near him or touch him, or he is kind of blocking you in a way from doing that, you cannot really see his face. So that's another way of using symbolism that we really like.
Yeah. So is there any other projects you've worked on that you would like to talk about, or is this really the main one?
Oh, well, this is our main project, and it has been for a while now. It's almost been 4 years in development, so and finally it's very close to being released, so we're really happy with that. And then we do have a few other projects, but nothing definite right now. So we will definitely keep on working on Blind for a while and make improvements, because, of course, post-launch support, we know it will take a while to get it perfectly done. So
yep. So how did you end up getting with Super Attack Games, or is that
Surprise Attack?
Surprise Attack Games. There you go.
Yeah, well, we met at GDC in 2014 because after the idea for the game was born at a global game jam in January 2014. That year the theme was we don't see things as they are, we see them as we are. And so someone thought as kind of a joke, well, what if we are blind? What do we see? We see everything black and so on. And it started kind of as a joke, but then we decided to explore the concept and add echolocation, and then to actually take that idea to other people to show. And at GDC in March that year, we met with Surprise Attack Games, and we eventually signed with them later that year, and so we started developing the game in early 2015.
And so they, so just for listeners know, so they, Surprise Attack Games, did I get it right this time?
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Awesome. So Surprise Attack Games looks for unique content, so they're looking less for gamey content, but more for unique experiences.
Yes,
Is that a good way to say?
They're mostly focused on unique niche kind of games. Blind is the first VR game that they're publishing, but I know they are publishing another VR game next year probably. And what's interesting for them is finding unique games, different experiences than the ones that we're used to normally, like in mainstream gaming.
Yes. And so would you say that yours is more of a narrative experience?
Definitely, yes.
Yep.
Yes, it's a narrative, exploration, puzzle-solving experience. It's generally slow-paced, so you can take your time and explore the house, solve the puzzles, learn more and more about the girl and her story, her past, and why she's there. And the whole game is about 4 to 5 hours long to complete, but there are some collectibles that you can find. So if you fully explore the house, it may take you even up to 6 hours or so. But yeah, it's definitely more narrative than action, even though towards the end, as you progress and you get closer and closer to the truth and to find out what's happened really, the pace changes a bit and it becomes a bit faster, and you actually are in some danger. Whereas in most parts of the game you cannot actually die or get harmed.
I see.
But towards the end you actually can experience game overs. So.
Right, and what's interesting is, like, it's the first time you hear that voice, you actually do get a feeling, a bit of like fear. As soon as, like, wait, there's someone else in this room with me? And I don't know if that was intentional, but it sounds like it, since the Warden is an antagonist type character.
Yeah.
So did you have to word the dialogue in a way to try and give that feeling, or?
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
We want that character to be ambiguous. That's why he's trying to reassure you somehow, but you don't really trust him because, of course, he's a stranger who brought you in a weird
you're asking,
house.
where's my child? And he's not really giving you answers, which is kind of weird.
Yes.
But yeah, it's a unique experience, and the game's called Blind, and it's coming out in April of 2018. So this is recorded at Pax East 2018, and this is Matteo from Tiny Bull Studios, published under Surprise Attack Games. And Matteo, I just want to thank you for coming on.
Thank you so much.
I'm here with Meredith from Ultimerse Studios, based out of Melbourne.
Yes.
And you're working on your title, Paperville Panic?
Yes, we are. Yeah, so it's in early access on Steam at the moment. We've been working on it since about June of last year, and we're almost getting to the point where we're ready for full release, so it's really exciting.
And what has been the what have you found, like, just being on early access? What has that done for your team?
Yeah, I mean, it's been really good for us. We knew that we wanted to release a lot of content, but because VR is such a new space, we wanted that feedback early. We knew everything that we put on Steam wasn't going to be super buggy. Like, it was a big focus for us that whatever we release was going to be high quality, but it just allows us to sort of drip feed that content and see what people want more of, so we can sort of tailor accordingly to make sure we're giving people the content that they're after in VR.
And is this your first VR title, or have you worked on others too?
It is. It's actually the studio's first title, full stop. So we kind of decided to jump straight in, and a big thing that we found with VR is that people are really hungry for good content, and especially content that's a little bit different. Like, we've got a lot of wave shooters, we've got a lot of rhythm-based games and audio-focused games, but the narrative content from the indie side is a lot harder to find. So it's like why people have gone crazy for budget cuts, right? Because that's a game that's got this really clever feel to it, and people are desperate to get their hands on it because it's just that little bit different. So,
and just the way they do Locomotion was very inventive when it came out.
Amazing. Like, we're so lucky. It's sort of a blessing and a curse that we're at this time in VR where there are so many things that we don't know how to do yet. Like, there are new ways to do Locomotion in terms of accessibility with things like subtitles and heights, and how do you do that in a way that's really good?
Yep, and Budget Cuts is known for just being immersive. So there's one part where the developers just had to be messing with you because they put like this window on the ground.
Yeah.
And a lot of people have just hit your face right into the floor as you try and look through it.
That's when you know you're doing something right. Like, the amount of times that we see people in game and they are ducking and dodging and practically laying on the floor to try and avoid getting hit by fireballs is hilarious. It's my favorite thing.
Yeah, so I just tried Paperville Panic, and the first thing I want to do is just duck behind the cover, and then pump my little water gun.
Oh yeah.
To go over, put out fires, and
it's
so the art style is very unique from other things that are out there. So how did that come about?
So it was a combination of things. We knew that we wanted to really push the mechanics and the narrative, and with the fact that VR does have that sense of people can get motion sick, having a really simple art style makes it a lot easier to push the optimization really high. So we have really high frame rates that stay really consistent, which is something that's quite difficult to do in VR. And our devs, who are amazing, have put a lot of time into that. And our artists are just that. It's such a fun art style to work with because everything has to come back to that feeling of paper. Like, you're in a paper town, the people are paper. So every time we create anything, it's like, cool, how would this be made? Is it made of cardboard? Is it made of plastic straws? Like, what is used to help this paper town create the world around it? So it's so much fun to play with.
Right, and so what's interesting to me is you made it to where you have the Locomotion where you teleport, but at certain times you lock the player into their location to kind of say, like, now your goal is to shoot your little water gun, right?
Yeah. So, and partially, that's something that we've talked a lot about, is where do you let the player free roam and where do you lock them into locations? We've tried to go for a balance. For example, in the full game, you basically start in what we call the hub world, and that is a massive town that you pretty much can just go wherever you want. You can explore. There's like a little mini muscle beach with like all these paper people lifting weights. Like, it's really fun. And then in certain levels, it's again that combination. So the apartment demo that we're showcasing here keeps you on a much more linear path, but in the actual game, you're going wherever you want, exploring rooms, trying to find little secrets. We're a big fan of Easter eggs in games, so we're trying to add a lot of little bits and pieces that people can find. But for those moments that are really kind of mission focused, we want to make sure they're focused on exactly what's going on in front of them.
Have you noticed anything where maybe the players' expectations are different because it's a paper town? So like if I pick up a weight, that's going to be different than I pick up a paperweight like on that beach, right?
Yeah, it's funny. Like, I mean, VR in itself, when people get really immersed, it's like you said, they'll start looking through, like hitting their head on the floor. And so it's really fun seeing how people react to the quirks of the town. So for example, like we've got a grocery store essentially in the town that's part of one of our missions. It's coming up in a couple of weeks. And in it, you've got row after row of cereal boxes, but they're all like staples and paper clips, and because that's what these people eat, like that's how they live. So it's funny seeing people look at a town that looks like a normal town, but everything has that twist.
see.
So they definitely get a little bit of a surprise because they get in there and are like, oh, it's just a town. And then there's all these little secrets that make it really clear that it is a paper town.
Right, that goes back to the Easter eggs you're talking about.
Exactly, yeah.
And it almost sounds like you took this paper thing and then just kind of went with it.
100%.
What was the original team meeting like where you just decided we're all paper?
It's pretty funny. The initial meeting basically was everyone sitting around just kind of throwing out ideas to see what felt good. And we kind of went back to that concept of when you were little, what did you want to be? So for a lot of people, it's like, I want to be a police officer. And it's like, well, there's a fair few games about police officers. Oh, okay, I want to be, a doctor. Yeah, there's a fair few games about being a doctor. I want to be a firefighter. And we're like, oh yeah, that could work. And then someone just threw out there, well, what if the town's made of paper? Like, what if there's this twist on it? And immediately everyone was just like, yes, that's it. Like, because we've had to ask ourselves so many ridiculous questions. Like, okay, what's confetti? Like, is that like the pink mist of the paper world? And we knew that with the art style we were going for, we wanted to be really cheeky. So there's this real juxtaposition between this adorable style and then this sort of South Park humor and feel when you're in the game.
Right. And so like when the enemies come out, they'll be like running and like waving their hands. And for a second I was like, are those like hostages? And then they start shooting at me and I'm like, oh great.
Yeah. Oh no, they are after you. It's funny when you're coming to to a convention like PAX, because we do a lot of discussion around demos, because we actually put our demos on Steam afterwards as free demos so that people can try it. So every time that we go to a con and we create a demo, that's where it goes. So we make sure that they work as a standalone as well, but you definitely get a lot more context when you're in the actual game, and you've got so much more narrative and you're following sort of a little bit more of a story along the way.
Right, and are you doing a Kickstarter or anything, or are you just fully funded studio?
We're really lucky. We have an incredible team of investors who love games and have loved games all their life and love talking to us about how they were the first gamers and they were in on these early machines. And so we're incredibly blessed with that. It's allowed us to do things like PAX East that for a Melbourne studio is really difficult to do,
right.
And especially in a market that is just starting to grow and just starting to develop. It's a big risk to take, so we're completely and ever grateful to them for letting us have such an incredible time with this work and what we're doing.
And can you talk to me a little bit about just like the Melbourne community, especially in VR, and how that's going?
We are incredibly lucky in Melbourne. Our indie community is quite massive. It's the biggest in Australia, and everyone is so supportive of everyone else's work. There's no sense of kind of competition or anyone being out to get each other. We know that if each other succeed, we succeed. We just want to help grow that as a whole. So VR is definitely smaller, but we're seeing more and more studios now starting to do a little bit more. There's a studio called Opaque Space, and they have done an incredible job with a game called Earthlight, which is just stunning and has won a bunch of awards, very well deserved, and they are a great group of people doing great work. Tin Man Studios as well has just started to talk about their VR game they're releasing, so we're starting to see a little bit more. Some of them are from brand new studios like Opaque, and some of them are from studios that have released a few different games. Samurai Punk as well just released The American Dream, so we're lucky that we've got a few studios that are really focused right now on developing good VR content, so we can reach out to them at any time. We take really good care of each other. We're very lucky.
It sounds like you're able to take notes from each other and kind of collaborate and learn.
Yeah, the amount of times that I have sent them a quick Twitter DM being like, help me, why isn't this working, or where can I go to talk to someone about this, and they are always happy to help. It's amazing.
Excellent. So is there anything else you'd like to talk about, or anything coming up, release dates?
I think just the fact that VR is not going anywhere. There's this real, I think, attitude from some people who have seen it happen in the past, but the tech's never been there like this. And there are so many great brands that are working really hard to bring the prices down. And the thing that I find is now that I have a Vive at home, because I'd been trying to find an excuse to get one for ages, and then as soon as I started working here, it was like, sold. The second that we get someone over, we get them in the headset, because it's not until you put the headset on that you realize how incredible the experience is and how many applications there are, from amazing games to training to education,
like healthcare.
It's healthcare, exactly.
Yeah.
It is only going to grow, and it's only going to get more fantastic. So get in now while the going's good.
Yeah, definitely, and that's kind of the start of like any good. But again, it's going really well. But we're now in that like trough of disillusionment, where a lot of the big press have stopped covering it. So,
100%.
What's been your experience of trying to get coverage or reaching out?
Yeah, press is tough for VR. It is a really difficult field because the press themselves are trying to work out, will it get the coverage? And when the market's small, it's a lot harder for them to justify writing an article that may or may not get clicks. We've been pretty lucky. We've had some really good press coverage, both internationally from VR-focused titles and a little bit from titles like we were featured on, we were talked about on Kotaku a couple of times in terms of one of the best Australian games as voted by the public for last year, which was incredible. That was just a complete blast to see us on there. But we've really tried to partner with the other people that are putting a lot of work and time and energy into VR. So whether that be VR publications or VR podcasts like yourselves, and all of the influencers and YouTubers that primarily stream VR, they have been fantastic. And the Reddit community as well is really excited and supportive. So we've tried to work in those spaces that already love it and hopefully let that enthusiasm grow and feed into the kind of press that is a little more hesitant to engage.
Yeah, and also I just find that like because your art style and like the world you've created, it almost has like a zany feel to it. It's a very nice break from the very serious, focused,
100%.
almost horror games that are out there that try and be very realistic.
Yeah.
It's interesting that in VR we can create these new realities that still feel very real and immersive. And I think you've just done a great job of that.
Yeah, we've kind of gone the complete opposite direction. And I mean, part of that I think is just because we're Australians and we are a bit silly. That's just kind of our standard, and we want to make people laugh. And I mean, I tend to play a lot of narrative-based games. That's what I love. So for me, coming onto this title, it was like, I knew that mattered. I needed it to matter to people and to make people laugh. And we want people to feel something. And, you know, sometimes you get home from a long day at work and you don't feel like having the weight of the world on your shoulders, but the weight of a paper town, that you can do when there's little things to make you laugh. So it mattered a lot to us.
Perfect. So are there any VR titles or experiences out there that are your favorite, or you feel like influence your current work?
I mean, we've tried to keep a little bit of distance. We want to make sure that what we create is really natural feeling. We find that a lot of our influence tends to come from the games that we enjoy that aren't VR, because if we can turn those experiences and feelings into working in that space, it sort of helps us shape that experience as something new and different. Like our most recent level, the convenience store that we're working on, that has a real time crisis feel, because we love that feeling of sort of the waves and the moving forward. So, and it's great when people recognize those, because then we know we've hit the mark with it and brought it into a new space. So definitely I find that our influences come from all our personal favorite games and that external world much more than other VR titles.
Yeah, but so do different levels have different mechanics to them?
So the mechanics are relatively similar. We've tried to keep it quite tight with mechanics so that we don't overwhelm the player, because even getting used to the controllers can be quite difficult. They do shift slightly. So for example, in most of the early levels, you just have a water pistol, and then once you get to that convenience store level, you've got a super soaker. So even with the weapons, we've tried to keep very sort of nostalgic and fun. So we do add little touches just to keep it fun and exciting, but we want to keep it relatively streamlined as well.
Yeah, and I noticed with the Vive ones, you made an interesting decision to use the grip buttons, because I've actually met developers who didn't know that exists. So for the listeners, you have your circle button up top where your thumb sits, and then the trigger on the back, and then on the side of the wand are these grip buttons. And it feels like the purpose is like you should be able to just squeeze your hand, but I feel like you have to like slightly alter or angle your hand to even get them.
Yeah.
So it's a very awkward kind of button.
Exactly.
To use.
And we've tried to, I mean, we use it so you can drop things, so that's kind of the standard.
Right, and it's not something that's happening too often,
no,
so it's fine.
But, and that's the same thing, like anything you drop, if you do it accidentally, because often when people get excited, they'll squeeze them and drop things.
Oh, okay.
It all returns to your belt. The axe, a lot of people don't know, you can throw that as far as you want and it will break a door, and it'll actually come back to you, sort of like Thor's hammer. So we've done a lot of that to make it easy for the player to pick things back up. But we also, again, on that Easter angle sort of side, we've added a lot of, if you lean on that trackpad at the top, or if you use the grip buttons, there's actually different hand gestures as well.
I see.
So you can kind of play around with that, and there's some in there that are pretty funny. I won't spoil anything, but
right.
So we've used it, but we've tried to use it in ways that aren't integral, but can add to the experience.
I see. And are you just exclusively on the Vive for now?
At this stage, yes. It is playable on Oculus. It's not optimized, but it is playable. Because at the moment, we're only sort of supporting that room scale for Oculus. And that's where we run into some difficulty for other people with different spaces. But yeah, we are planning to optimize it for Oculus in the long term. And then ideally, we'd like to look at PSVR. That's a conversation that we've got to have with Sony and see what that looks like. But we definitely want to get it on as many platforms as possible and to as many people as possible so they can feel how fun VR actually is.
Yep, and it's Paperville Panic. It's currently available on Steam. And this is Meredith from Ultimerse. Ultimerse.
Yeah.
Ultimerse Studios. There you go. Perfect. Well, I really want to thank you. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
No, thank you so much. Keep doing the great work you're doing.
All right.
We love it.
Thanks.
Thank you so much for listening. We would like to keep sharing more about VR and AR with you, so please consider a few dollars to our Patreon linked in the show notes. The Virtuality Podcast is produced by Jason Parks and music by Rachel Dazinski. This podcast is in collaboration with Boston VR and Boston AR. Monthly meetups and events can be found on meetup.com. You can also follow us on Twitter @VirtualityCast and learn more at our website virtuality.show.